Okay, I think we're up and running live. For all those who are new to this channel, welcome. For those that have been here before, welcome back. My name's Des Trindle. This is my first YouTube live, so there's no one on the channel at the moment, which is probably a good thing because I'm learning how to drive the whole system. And what I wanted to do today was really just have a quick talk about maybe the three most common things that I see triathletes, mistakes that I see triathletes make out there, especially in their training, and more often that goes over and lays into their racing as well. So it's one of those things that can be frustrating, and it's one of those things that if you don't know, you don't know. So heading into it, this is going to be a fairly short live. As I said a little while ago, this is me also just learning how the YouTube live works and how it's all set up. But as the thumbnail said, what we're going to do, and very quickly, we're just going to go in and we're going to have a quick talk about the three mistakes that not just new triathletes, but triathletes in general, they make. So, and the first one I'm going to put down is that they train too hard and they train too often. Yesterday's run, I had just a 1 hour, 60 minute, and it was an upper zone 2 run. It was part of my own program. And I was listening to a podcast in that, and the podcast was the 80-20 rule, and 80-20 in triathlons specifically. I can't remember who did that book, but it's worth just having a Google and looking up. You can get it on, I had it on Audible, but I'm sure you can buy the book as well at the different bookstores and online as well. So have a look at that. But what it talked about was a lot about how elite triathletes train, and the fact that 80% of their training is done in very low zones. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the zones, generally what we do is we break our training into 5 different zones. Well, I do anyway. I work on 5. I keep it quite simple. We can base those zones off several different things. So we can base them off heart rate, or we can base them off power. Now, we can measure those zones in a few different ways. So we can measure those zones using a heart rate monitor, or we can measure it using a power meter, or we can measure it using perceived effort. So I'm not going to go too much into how we measure the zones, but what I'm going to point out and say, it's very, very important to overcome this. The number one reason is of training too hard is learn what your zones are, do some research on them. In the description, you'll see a little link to resources. I actually have a heart rate zone calculator where you can put in your age, you can put your resting heart rate in, and it will come up with the 5 different zones for you. If you are going to do triathlons this day and age, you can buy a very, very cheap heart rate monitor for next to nothing. Less than $100, I think you'll pick up a heart rate monitor, and then you can go right through to several $100s when you get into premium versions in the Garmin and the Wahoo and things like that range. So I use a Garmin watch, and I use a Garmin bike computer, but I have a preference to the Garmin brand. So other people have preferences to other brands. So looking back at that, though, once we do establish our zones, is depending on what we're doing, and I'm going to say 80% of the time in the lower zones for shorter races up to and including Olympic distance. And I'm going to say as high as 85 to 90% in those lower zones and anything over Olympic distance. And why I'm saying that is if we go out and we're racing an Ironman, for instance, we're not going to be racing that in our zone 3s and 4s. We won't be able to sustain that all day. We're looking at bringing those back to a little bit. And what we see in training, and I see it all the time, especially when I'm out on the bike and the bike paths here in Brisbane, is a lot of the guys are just smashing constantly. And that can come about for a few reasons. If we look at swim for particular, you might be in a swim group with a set program. triathletes as a basis, we're pretty much alpha one personalities. They tend to tell us we're competitive by nature. I think as we get older, that does wear away a little bit, and we can check our egos a little bit. But I know in my 20s, I always wanted to win. Let's face it, you weren't training hard, you weren't doing that to try to get that top step on the podium. But that eases as you get a bit older, I guess. So going back to that, let's look at the swim. It's very easy to get caught up in someone else's program. And swimming to me is almost opposite of everything else in the fact that it takes and requires a lot of technique. And the best thing I did, and I'm going to go back to when I was younger, I was in my early 20s and I was a woeful swimmer. I would do the Noosa triathlon and other Olympic distance races, and it was nothing for me to swim 27 and 28 minutes. I ended up joining a little masters group at Maroochydore. And at the time, it was run by a lovely old lady, and she would have been close to mid-70s to 80s. And what she got me to do was slow right down and concentrate on what I was doing with my position in the water and with the catch and everything like that. And she brought it right back to that technical side of it. So I wasn't just focusing on how fast I was swimming 100 or a 50 or a 25. I was more focused on where my body position was in the water. Now, the net result of that was within a very, very short period of time, I went from getting left behind a long way in the swim to swimming literally 18 and a half, 19 minutes and coming out at the back end of the pro packs in swims. I remember going across to WA and do Busselton half, and I come out at the back of the pro. This is back when they used to start everyone in one wave, and I was absolutely shocked. And the only thing had changed was my technique. So sometimes we need to look at that. That was definitely, I was always swimming too hard. And I was not concentrating on my form, and that is a really big issue. So the dangers that we can look at from training too hard. Now, if we, especially in the run, the bike, not so much. We can overtrain in any of the disciplines, and we'll pick that up very quickly. We'll become irritable. We'll have broken sleep, things like that. We'll lose our motivation for training. They're all indications that we're overtrained and we've been training too hard. In the run especially, you'd find out that you end up with a lot of injuries. And that was very common for me as well when I was younger. For some reason, same mentality again. I thought every run had to be a 10K, 45-minute, 43-minute run. And I was never better than a 40-minute runner anyway, where I would have been better off slowing that long endurance runs down by a significant amount and just building that endurance and building that muscle fatigue in there as well. So the funny thing about it is I had a bike crash coming back about, what are we now, February, so about 11 months ago. And it put me out of training for about 8 months. Eight months, let's correct that, 8 weeks. And what I did after that was I came back with okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to race Ironman Cairns, which is coming in June. So we're just over 3 and a bit months away from that. But I'm going to be very disciplined to do 85% of my training in those lower zones. And what I've found with that is that I haven't sacrificed any speed. The speed has been showing up on race days. So I've been lucky enough this year. I think I've raced 5 or 6 shorter races from, 750 meter swim, 20K bikes, 5K runs through to Olympic distance at the 1.5, 40 and 10. And there's not a single race this year that I haven't been on the podium in my age group. And I really solidly, I don't put that down to my ability. I put that down to correct training, especially at my age. I'm 57 years old. So that's been a real key to it. So let's move into the second part of, or the second reason that a mistake that I see most people making is that they're underfueling, especially on their longer sessions. So to me, I have a key session each week in bike, and at the moment that's drifting out to the 4-hour mark. It'll go out to 6 hours in the next few weeks, and my run's going out to sort of 1 hour 45, 2 hour, and then I do a second run that same day as well, so of about 30 minutes. But what's really important is that get that carbs in, train the gut on getting used to tolerating those carbs. At the moment, I'm running on about 60 grams per hour, and I'm working my way up to that. I find at the moment with my own gut, if I go a little bit higher, I find that I end up with a little bit of stomach issues. So, and it takes time. It's like our training. We just need to progress that. The fueling doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be difficult. Every session, I did it today. I've got an hour and 45-minute run. I put into ChatGPT. Tomorrow I've got a 1 hour, 45-minute run. I want to use 60 grams of carbs per hour. Come up with a simple recipe for me. I make my own gels up. I use maltodextrin, fructose, and sodium. And it gives me that percentage. And in fact, if you look in the description in the link page, you'll see a link across to that. There's a section there, and there's even an AI prompt where you can copy that prompt, whack it into a ChatGPT or any of the AI chats like that, put your duration, the carbs that you want to hit, and it'll come up with what your ideal recipe is. And the other thing with that is that it saves a crap load of money. You can be looking at about $2 for a session compared to about $20 or $30 for a session, especially if we're going out on 4 and 5 hour bike rides where we're chewing up a lot of carbs. And without those carbs, you don't want to flatten yourself, because that takes away from your ability then to be able to back up for those future training sessions. And remember, with this type of training, it's the consistency of the session. So I'm always mindful. Even this morning, I went out and I did a 2-hour bike, and I did it a firm and upper zone 2 bike. So, I was holding around that 120 to 125 heart rate, which is my upper zone 2 level. And watching my power as well. I run a power meter, which is the pedal-based power meter system, and just being consistent with that. And in the same thing, if you treat the nutrition like I was this morning, I have a little timer set for every 15 minutes on my Garmin, where it reminds me that I need to be drinking and I need to be taking my nutrition. Now, this morning I took nutrition in it was only a 2-hour ride. So I put 40 grams of carbs per hour, and all I used there was 40 grams of sugar in my water bottle, in a 500 ml bottle. I took 2 bottles, mixed it up with a little cordial and a little bit of salt as well. And that covered my nutrition for this morning's ride. So if we go into the third reason to me is they ignore their race execution. This is a really difficult one for a lot. And I see this a lot over the middle distance, and especially the Ironman distance races, where people get on the bike and they'll overbike by anything from 5 to 10%. Once you start that overbiking, you pay for it later. And you might not even pay for it on the bike, you pay for it on the run. I had that little Roby Bay race 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and it was, I think, an 850 metre swim, 24k bike, and only a 6k run. The bike was very, very crowded, which also meant that you couldn't overbike it because it was becoming quite dangerous. So you had to be very cautious and hold back a little bit on the bike. But the good thing about that is what it did was it left a lot in the tank for the run. And you find that you'll pick a lot of people up in that area. So ignoring race execution is a big thing. And going back to the nutrition, that can very easily get over-missed as well. So if you get caught up in everything and you're not looking at your nutrition in the race, you're going to pay for it at the other end of the race. And that's really there's no way, once you've dug that hole and you're down, it's very hard to get back in. And I heard it, one of the old cyclists years ago said to me, once you're thirsty, it's too late. He said, you're thirsty, you'll never get it back. And he was very, very right about that. So fitness doesn't come overnight. I'm going to say that, especially as you get older. I mentioned earlier in this live, I'm 57 years old. My recovery is very, very important now. My nutrition is very, very important now. And my strength sessions are very important, as working on my core strength. And you can work on those when you're actually doing the activity. You can be very focused on your posture in the swim, on the bike, and in the run. And that all adds up to your core as well. So most of the triathletes don't lack fitness. What they lack is the discipline in the training and the discipline on race day to be able to execute properly. So before we go too hard, just to summarize, the three issues that I see is training too hard, check the ego at the door, come back, slow things down, look at, if you're doing the shorter races, maybe, do an 80-20, so 80% in your lower zones, 20% in your high intensity work. Be very mindful of what your next session is, so you know that your consistency is the key. Don't underfuel. Look at your nutrition, look at your general diet. It's no use going out on a Friday night and getting absolutely hammered at the pub and then trying to go out and do a 5-hour ride or a 4-hour ride on the weekend. That's not going to be any sort of benefit. You might as well not do the ride. So during the exercise itself, make sure you're fueling correctly. Practice that fueling. Treat it as the fourth discipline in a triathlon. That to me is very, very important as well. Ignoring race day execution. Things do go wrong in the races. I've had 2 races this year where I've dropped chains. I've changed that setup now, so it's not going to happen. But both of those situations, they can throw you out a little bit. And you have a lot of temptation then to overbike a little bit because you've lost that 60 or 90 seconds, depending on how long it took to fix that. I've had Ironman situations where I've had punches. I've done 6 Ironman races and I've had 2 punches, both single punches in separate races. So it does happen. So make sure that you practice that as well in your training. Make sure that you have the spares on. I've had one Ironman race where I've had a very rough road down at Port Macquarie there, and I've had the aero bar come loose. Carry a little multi-tool on you. For the extra weight, it takes 30 seconds to retighten that bolt, retension that bolt. Things like that make a big difference to your race as well. So in closing, like I said earlier, this is my first live stream. I'm really trying to learn a little bit about the live stream, about YouTube myself. And I'm doing it purely for the reason of trying to give back to a sport that's been very good to me. I did my first triathlon in 1983 in Nepean, and we've come quite a long way now. So that's 40 plus years of racing, training, and enjoying the sport. So anyway, if you've watched this or come across it, that is not one or two watching live, but if you've come across this live stream later, thanks for watching if you've got this far. In the descriptions, you'll see that link across to those free resources. There's quite a few free resources there. There's training templates. There's how the DIY gels. There's your heart rate zones, and there's a few other bits and bobs. So thanks for today. I am going to have some lunch myself and get ready for the next session. Cheers, guys.